Welcome to episode 250 of Bay HQ podcast. And this is a landmark episode for us. And we're going to use this episode to do some big announcements, refresh you on what we even stand for today, and so many other things. So it's a huge achievement. Obviously, most podcasts never get to this level. And that's a huge amount of hard work behind the scenes that's got us here. But what's interesting for you? So first, I'm going to explain who we even are today. Then I'm going to some of the big strategic shifts. So if you're watching this on Apple or Spotify, you'll probably notice we're now called Startups Inside Out. But I'm going to explain why later on. And after that, I'm going to go into why we made so many strategic shifts in 250 episodes. And most podcasters haven't done this, and I haven't really talked about this either, about there's a lot of strategy and tactics that go into what you're watching and why we're doing the way we're doing it. Finally, we're going to have 5 top tips for anybody who wants to start a business podcast so that you can learn from my journey and what we've been able to achieve here. So who even are we? And one of the crazy things is that we are now one of the best communities for startups in the UK, hands down. Entrepreneurs, investors, there are very few communities that have the scale and have the impact that we've had. So for those of you who don't know, Bay HQ stands for British Asian Entrepreneurs. But our impact is spread much wider than that. And people are welcome to our events, people are welcome to take part in our programs, and we've been able to have this really big impact on the startup scene, especially in London, and we're now expanding wider than that. But what do I even mean by Bay HQ and the impact we've had? So obviously, 250 episodes of the podcast, you should know that, you're on episode 250. But beyond that, we've done so much more. So nearly 7,000 people have attended our events, and that's about 60-40, where it's an event hosted by us versus where we've guested at other people's events and given talks and given workshops as well. And 10,000 people is a lot, right? And we never thought we'd get to those kind of numbers when we started out, but that's accelerating every month. We're doing so much more. So there's much more events to come up in the second half of the year. The big thing we're now refocusing on as a consequence of the podcast and the events we've done is how do we really help the founders in our network? How do users investor connections really make a difference? So we've had 4 mentorship programs now. There's 95 people who've been through that. And some of these companies are doing incredible things, and it's been a pleasure to work with them, a pleasure to get to know them. Then we've also had our school program. So we've had 80 state school students who have been working with us. We've got them work experience. And over this summer, during the 5 weeks of summer, we're going to have students in our office every week, and we'll be putting them through hackathons to get them the experience of going from ideation to validation to building an MVP, creating that solution, and then pitching us as well. So that's something which really warms my heart in particular of when we had my old school in here and seeing the kids go about what they're doing and having that confidence. There's very few things amongst what we've done that gives me that level of satisfaction. The other big thing we've done this year is the incubator. And if you're an early stage founder or somebody thinking about becoming a founder, this is what you need to be paying attention to. So the incubator is people with 9-to-5 job, people who are students, people who are maybe just considering entrepreneurship or they're taking the first steps. It's a structured program for 6 weeks where each week we have workshops, but assignments related to it. And the real value comes in those assignments because I will sit there and make a Loom video to give you feedback on whatever you do. And we're then passing and failing people. So it's not everybody just gets to do it. It's who's serious about this? Because if you're serious, we can really help you. But if you're not serious and you're not going to turn up and you're not going to do the work, then we can't. And that's our resources. But there's another one of those incubators launching later on this year, which will be bigger and better because we're going to take the feedback from this cohort and apply it to you. So you can get all that experience and all that combined knowledge of what we've been able to do. So that program side is going to become our real focus. And in the future, you can basically consider us the YC for British Asians in the UK. And that accelerator program launching early next year is a huge focus for us. And everything we're doing so far is all building towards that. How do we get the best founders who maybe wouldn't have the network or the experience otherwise to truly succeed? And how do we take them to the moon? And that's what gets me going. That's what keeps me going, when all these struggles and all these stresses that we have. Another big thing for October this year is our State of Asian fundraising report. So in that report, we're working with HSBC Innovation Banking, Jolson, Bohurst, TechNation, and we're getting that real data layer behind what is the work we're doing, why is it important, what can government do to assist us on that, what can corporates do? How can you get more involved? And having that data and that scientific actual numbers behind it is going to make a huge difference because we can really see where the gaps are. And spoilers is that Asian women aren't getting enough funding. So a lot of our programs, a lot of stuff we're doing, while it's for everybody, we do have that lens of making sure we are really working with Asian women who are just as capable as the men, but sometimes being overlooked. And how do we change that? And how do we impact those people? And if you're not already a member, it's really easy to join. It's completely free. Literally just bayhq.com/join. Totally free. You get access to our WhatsApp group, investor list, all this other good stuff. But if you want to find out about our events and our programs, that's the way to do it, right? Don't message me because I can't keep up to date with it. Join the community, be part of something special that we're building. And there's so much more to come. This is only the beginning, right? We're 2.5 years in, 250 episodes in. We're nothing yet, right? When you look at us in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, there is so much more to come, which is really exciting. Now to spicy stuff, right? We're making changes. And this is like something I've been working on in the background for a while, I haven't been able to talk about, or I have been able to talk about it, right? Because one thing I always advise people, talk to people about your ideas, tell them what's going on. So this podcast is being rebranded to Startups Inside Out. Why? Why have I made that change? Why are we changing after 250 episodes? The basis of this at the beginning was the idea of sharing those stories which are underrepresented that people don't get to see. Now 250 episodes in, it's a bit different, right? There's a huge back catalogue. If you don't think there's people who look like you or people from ethnic minority backgrounds who are succeeding, we've proven you wrong. You can literally just go through the history of this episode and this podcast and see that. So how do we adapt now? Because I think we've achieved that early mission. And now when we get people on the podcast, in reality, it's useful for everybody. It's not a case of just because you're Asian that the advice is different. So by broadening that out, by renaming ourselves to Startup Inside Out, it's showcasing that this advice that we're giving is useful to everybody. Anybody can learn from an Asian entrepreneur. And the parallel I often draw is that people sometimes go to female founder-only events, right? But I can learn from female founders. And if I can look up to women and look up to these incredible founders, then, and more people, young people in particular, and people growing, can be looking up to people from different backgrounds, it creates those bridges, and that's what we really want to do here, right? We're not trying to build walls here. We're trying to build bridges. So if more people listen to the podcast and they get inspired by Asian founders and respect Asian founders more, then that's a good thing. And how it's going to work. So 2 episodes a week, right? Startups Inside Out. I'm very proud of this too, by the way. So the insider episode is going to be with a Series A+ founder or a VC partner or principal, somebody senior. And this is very intentional because the podcast isn't about, as much as it was before, about spotlighting these people who are maybe not seen, because we've showcased so many people already. It's more about how do we give value to you. This is about the podcast, about the audience. It's not about the guests, it's about the audience. So if we can get you the chats with the people who are further ahead and really get deep into their stories to give you value, to make sure that you're learning, that's the most important thing to us. And then the second episode, so if you might as the insider episode, right? You get to see me talking to somebody who's further ahead, and we talk about the deep stuff, not just the basic level stuff. And then you have the outsider episode. And the outsider episode is me, who is going to be giving practical tips. So you can see we've been doing this for the last couple of months, right? Where I'll pick a topic and go really deep into that so you can learn. And this format, I think, works really well because the insider one gives you experience of different people's stories, how they've gone about it. Whereas the outsider one is giving you that foundational knowledge and foundational information to give you a fighting chance when you're in different rooms. The other element of the decision too is that now BayHQ is so much more than a podcast. It started out as just a podcast. So now I believe on Spotify and Apple, if I've done this right, you'll see Startups Inside Out by BayHQ. And for discovery as well, it means that now people are going to find us more often. Right now, if you don't know what BayHQ is, why would you click on BayHQ podcast? It doesn't make sense to you. So that's a learning process. And now, as we got further ahead, we can have these sub-brands. We can have these different things of the incubator as a separate entity under BayHQ, Startups Inside Out as a separate entity under BayHQ, the Baycelerator as a separate entity under BayHQ too. And again, another little spoiler here is I'm writing 2 books. The first book is Startups for Outsiders. So if you message me during summer and I ignore you, it's because I'm busy writing. And what I'm doing is taking all of this knowledge from so many episodes, from so much of what we've done in the last couple of years, putting it into a book format to create that Bible for you. Because right now there's lots of books about startups, but I don't know really what to recommend for people who aren't from this space. And that's what I'm creating here, right? It's giving you that book that's going to be that Bible, and that Bible, you know what I mean? I'm not being religious with that best thing we can do for you to learn from an outsider's perspective. And it then helps us because then I can't necessarily talk to everybody individually, but we can sell that book to everybody. And it's a cheap book, right? It's like 20 quid. For 20 quid, can that teach you the lessons that help you make millions? And that's the idea behind it. And it's a way for us to create a product which is then repeatable. It helps our revenues, all those different things too. And it gives us that magnum opus. The second book is going to be Startups for Insiders. And this is going to be all the stuff I've learned behind the scenes. Because you got to remember, on the podcast, people can't talk about their investors badly. They can't talk about their employees badly. They can't talk about their co-founders badly. But it's all this really crucial information that early stage founders really need to know to make a successful business. So that's some of the announcements on that side, right? About why we're doing certain changes, why this now looks different in your feed, why you've got, even for example, on the thumbnail for the podcast on Spotify, it's now going to have my face there. Why is that the case? Because people connect to faces. I try to differentiate this from myself by calling it Bay HQ and not having my face on there. But in reality is that we need that personal connection in order to get people moving. So now to move on, and this is going to be the bit that's going to be really exciting for you nerds out there, about how Bay HQ podcast, Startups Inside Out, has adapted over time and why we made the decisions we did and how we've just outcompeted everything else in this division. So right at the start of this, first of all, remember I'd already done 100 podcasts. So I wasn't coming to this as a beginner. I had the reps, I had the respectability. When I ask people to come on Bay HQ podcast, I can say, hey, do you want to come on the podcast? I've interviewed over 100 people, including the founders of Netflix and Twitter. That gives me a massive unfair advantage. You can't replicate what I've done without doing those works and being able to get that level of trust and respect. We also started out with 2 episodes a week on purpose because most other people can't do that. It's making it intentionally difficult because other people can't then compete in that space. We can stand out amongst people who are very inconsistent because we can just showcase people, we're serious, you should trust us because we're going to keep doing this work hard and keep going. The other thing 2 episodes a week does is it gives us access to other people's audiences, right? By having 2 guests a week means that people who are on the podcast, if they reshare it, people are seeing us. So now whenever I go to an event in the Asian space, somebody will know somebody's been on this podcast because they have 200 guests, right? 200 guests in a relatively small niche of where people know each other, it's going to pay off dividends, right? So that was a big reason behind that strategy at the start. It was very difficult. It was a huge amount of work. But because it was difficult, it made it worthwhile and made it very rewarding too. The other thing you can see from the early episodes, right? You go right back to the beginning. The backgrounds of the guests were very different. You had influencers, you had artists, you had authors, you had small business owners, people with different random careers, because we weren't yet set in our niche and we didn't really know where we wanted to go. And we did that through sheer reps. The more reps we did, the more we understood what's our value, where can we stand out, where can we really be the best in our category, not trying to be the best in every category. And over time, what's happened is that we've then filtered down to multiple startups. So initially, we were looking at people who've raised at least 1 million or have 5 million in revenue. That's now gone up further. We're looking at, say, Series A and beyond, and people with much more significant revenue, because it's looking at who has his experience in that backstory to really give you the value. Because, and like I said, I've said this before, but it matters about who we're going to get on that can have those war stories. Because when people at the beginning, you can talk about, okay, why did you quit your job? Like, how is that a decision for you? But we've had like 100, 200 episodes of that now, right? That's less valuable. There's already stuff out there. What's more valuable is, okay, how do you go from that start to actually building something that's worthwhile and is going to last and have legs? That's what I'm interested in, right? I'm interested in how does this last for years and years and years, as opposed to what's the starting point? The reality is that everywhere I go, people are like, oh, there's nothing for Asians. But it's like, there is so much for Asians now. There are so many other podcasts dealing with different issues, dealing with different spaces. And there's no point us trying to be the same as everybody else. We are a category of one. We are the community for high growth Asian heritage founders. And we say high growth, we mean startups and fast growing consumer brands. There is no competition. We're not the biggest, we're not the best, we are the only. And when you think about your strategy, it's how can you be the only is the best way to think about it. And what we had in the past too, we had different experimental styles of the podcast. So we had the lab podcast, and the lab podcast was with operators. So that's people who are working at startups or people who are advising startups as opposed to the people who founded them. And we did quite a few episodes of this, and it was valuable, but idea was meant to be more framework driven. The challenge is what we had, the friction is that lots of people are operators, they want to talk about their career journey, but that's not our target audience, right? We're not necessarily trying to target that thing. We're trying to target the builders, the people who are starting companies. And it's not that there's not value in people who career journeys in tech. It's just not our niche. And other people can do that. Other people can build something for, okay, how do you get promoted? That's just not what we're interested in. And well, we're interested in it, but we can't cover everything. So with the lab podcast, it's an experiment, but now we're going more towards this other style where I will do those episodes, which are more framework driven. And how do you learn this? How do you do that? Because I have much more control. The other element of when you're interviewing operators is that often they have to get it approved by their boss, which slows down this whole process of building the podcast. And it makes things more difficult. Where there's more approvals, there's more, it adds extra overheads. Another thing we did is have different guest hosts. And while I'm not abandoning this necessarily, the challenge is that until we have our operations and that velocity point where we don't have too many struggles, when you've got multiple guest hosts, managing that and make sure things are going correctly and managing the different processes, it just becomes greater overhead, right? So we had Anshika hosted lots of episodes for us. She did a great job. We had Nikita, we had other people too, Tanya and Mona. I'm going to leave that in there. So, but by having these different hosts, we just weren't yet at that scale to be able to manage that. And it's a learning for me, and it was a good learning to have, is that actually it's easier for us to have this under my control in our office. I'm here all the time. I can record this episode very easily because I'm just sitting here anyway. Now, in the future, we will diversify again. We will go into multiple hosts so that it reduces the dependency on me. But it was premature for us to reduce the dependency on me. We needed more of me because as a founder, I'm going to be more motivated. I'm going to have more time than everybody else is, all those different things. And on that point too, so obviously having the solo episodes like this, it's much more in my control, makes life easier. And also I can control the narrative. I can get this to the quality I want to get it rather than breathing down and micromanaging somebody else. So if you want to look at our strategy over the years, right? So 2.5 years in, 2 episodes a week. And when there's been very difficult periods, we have slowed that down to 1 episode a week. Then we've tried out different things. We've segmented our niche to more specific to high growth consumer brands and tech startups. Rather than trying to do everything, we're only interviewing people later stage now. And then we're also doing episodes where it's just me speaking like this, because these ones are hopefully very useful to you guys. But you see that journey, right? And one of the things I would say we made a mistake of at the beginning, or is this mistake that's paid off, but by hiring a studio, it increased our costs massively and made everything much more difficult, which I probably wouldn't have done in hindsight. And now obviously we have our own podcast studio, we have our own office in this sense, that makes it much easier to record. But at the same time, this comes with a cost. And I wouldn't advise this to everybody. You've got to look at your own costs and what makes sense for you. If I now transition into what are my top 5 tips for anybody who wants to start their own podcast. So tip number 1, don't start a podcast. And if me saying that has just dissuaded you from starting a podcast, you shouldn't have done it in the first place. Podcasts are a lot of work, even with AI, even with these other tools out there. It's not like, if it's a fad for you, there's just no point in starting. The whole 99% of podcasts don't make it past episode 21. You've got to look at, is this the best use of your time? Is it a distraction? Is it a shiny object? You need to have a really clear case of why you're bothering to do it, because there's no money in it. There's all these different challenges. It's got to be better than, oh, my friend said I should start a podcast, I'm starting a podcast, or I like talking, so I'm going to start a podcast. You're going to commit to a lot of work, and you've got to really enjoy that and also see that it's the best use of your time. The second part is stick to a niche and stop trying to please everybody. And I consistently see this. Everybody is like, oh yeah, I'm going to start a podcast in this niche. I'm like, you mean like there's 10 other podcasts that do exactly the same thing you do? And the challenge is that once you start a podcast, everyone wants to come on your podcast because they want to market themselves. They want to showcase themselves. They're doing it for their own selfish reasons. As the host, as a person owning that podcast, you've got to have a wider lens. You've got to look at, is this useful for my audience? Am I helping my audience? And if not, and it's also, you might be helping your audience, but you've got to have a very clear line of like, why are people listening to this? So we have a very clear line now. We interview late stage founders, and then we provide educational content through me. There's no point in us interviewing people from different business backgrounds. They might be super successful. They might have built like 20 dentist companies, 20 dentists, but we're not going to teach people how to build dentistry companies. Well, that's not our niche. We're not going to do that. So it's understanding like, what is your niche? How are you fulfilling that? Because generalist podcasts, and the challenge is you look at people say like Stephen Bartlett. Stephen Bartlett can do whatever he wants because Stephen Bartlett has a huge personal brand. If you don't have a huge personal brand, you need to be the best in a particular sector and own that sector. I can't do what I want. I am not that big, but I can be the best in this niche. And it's really difficult for people to understand that. And I give the example of Ali Abdaal. Ali Abdaal started off with helping medical students get into university. Then he did more stuff for study-related stuff. And then he's overall gone into productivity. But he built his audience on a particular niche where he was the best in category, and then expanded that category. And that's the strategy you have to go for. You earn the right to be a generalist. You can't start off in that way. And if you can, you've got some kind of unfair advantage. The other thing to think about too is that people are always going to want more from you. You've got to get used to saying no. You've got to get used to being decisive in saying yes or no. Because I'm very quick now to say, like, sorry, like you can't come on the podcast. Straight no. It sounds blunt. It sounds savage. But if I'm wasting my time worrying about things, then I'm not getting my job done and I'm not serving the audience. And that's my job, right? I need to get the best guests on I can get on who I believe are going to help you, who are related to what we're trying to achieve. And that relevance is so, so important. Stick to a niche. Okay, third is record the first 10 episodes with people that you already know really well. There's so many people reach out to me like, oh, can you come on my podcast? Like, if you haven't released an episode yet, I've been on podcasts before where they didn't release my episode because they gave up. Like, why am I going to waste my time on that? So first 10 episodes, do it with people you know well. And if you don't know 10 people well enough who are in your niche that you want to record a podcast with, you shouldn't be doing that podcast. You need to go back and build your network first and come back to the podcast afterwards. But if you can do 10 episodes, stick it with people you know, you enjoy it, and then continue, then okay, you're going somewhere, right? But so many people waste a huge amount of time on outreaching as guests, getting all into hissy fits about like, oh, nobody's accepting me, nobody's replying to me. You've got to earn it. You've got to earn that right. The first 10 episodes I did on my podcast way back in 2021, all people I knew, all people who wanted to talk to me. So you've got to earn that right to then be able to expand and to go further and further. Now when I reach the podcast guests, some of them still won't reply to me, but it's much easier because I've done 400 podcasts. I'd earned the right for these people to give me their time. And that's the thing you've got to think about. Any podcast guest is that they need to believe that you're worth their time, and then it becomes more of a mutual thing, whereas they want to talk to you too. The fourth element is to think of a podcast as a distribution channel for an overall business, as opposed to a business in itself. And I constantly see this, and I don't get where people think there's so much money in podcasting, because there just isn't. Unless your name is Joe Rogan or Stephen Bartlett or some of these other people right at the very top, there really isn't much money in this game. But if you can build the trust and use the podcast to build the trust, the depth of relationship, then that is where the value is in. If people trust you, what can you do with that trust? Can that help you convert clients to your business? Can it help you convert deals in other places? You know, podcast right now isn't sponsored. On a sheer direct basis, this doesn't earn me any money. But the fact that we have this podcast means that I have a huge amount of trust, I have a huge amount of goodwill, And that means that we convert way more of our sales than we would do otherwise. So when you're thinking about podcasting, especially if you've got an existing company, when people are looking for sponsors, I'm like, why are you looking for sponsors? Your podcast should be advertising your company. Because there is not that much money in sponsorship to begin with. And if you're spending this much money on it, you're dramatically underrating your time. The reason I do this is, one, because other people can't compete on the amount of output we can do, which means I can build trust with people much quicker than other people can. And I can convert that trust into people coming to events, people joining our programs. How we get best founders on there is because they can watch these episodes and build some level of relationship with me, some level of relationship with BayHQ, and then come to our programs. And then that's where we can start really getting the engine of the business going. And then the final tip for you here is brutal consistency. If you want to build anything, but you're not willing to do the reps, you're not willing to build it. And I coined this the other day. I don't know if I invented it or I've seen it somewhere else. But launching is massively overrated. Consistency is underrated. And me doing this many episodes, 250 episodes, who else do you know that's done 250 episodes? There's not many of us, right? By doing that, that's where the compounding comes into play. That's where the snowball effect comes into play. If you're wanting to start a podcast, but you don't see yourself doing it in a couple of years' time, are you just wasting resources? Are you just wasting your time? And can you keep putting those reps when you're not seeing the results? Because the results come after time. People like Chris Williamson, they didn't get any money for the first 100 episodes. I didn't get any money for my first 100 episodes. And so many of these people, you think that overnight successes, but it takes a long time to get there. So when you look at this, if you want to start this podcast game, if you want to start doing something like this, does it make sense for your business? Is it a distribution channel for something else? Have you got 10 guests that you know already if you're going to do a guest-based episode? Can you stick to a niche where you stand for something and be the best in that particular area? And then finally, do you have what it takes to just be serious about it and really put in that work and keep going, even when maybe it doesn't make sense to do so? So those are my 5 podcast tips there. And one thing to just end on, right? So obviously there's a bunch of humble brags that have come in this episode earlier. And I want to be very upfront with you guys. So this has been a really difficult journey. There has been so much stress. This year has been devastating for the business in terms of how we've had to recover from so many different crises. There's a crisis every other week. There's things where we just don't know if we're going to actually make it. And I want you to know that, right? People can look at what we're doing and think about how everything is all rosy all the time. There's a huge burden of stress upon me. The responsibility of what I'm doing and being able to put stuff out and to be this voice of different people. I take that very seriously. It's like I said, there's an element of I enjoy what I do, but it's also, do I just sometimes have that burden and the weight on top of me that crushes me? And it does, right? Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, how do I keep this going? How do this make sense? And when we built ourselves into a position this year again, touch wood, that things are in a good place, that we can really build upon this and go further. But people don't see from all that output we've done, how much years it's taken out of our lives. How many, the white hairs in my beard that you can now see if you watch this on YouTube, that's come because there has been a lot of stuff that's gone into this. It's not easy. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you about how I'm some prodigy and everything has come so easy to us and we're so amazing. No, it has been a really tough journey. So thank you to the partners that supported us. Thanks to the patrons that supported us. And if you can support us in some way, and you are later on in your journey, later on in your life, that you do have that financial ability to support us, it really does make a difference. And on that podcasting side, I'll be straight up with you as well. I don't do one-to-one calls at all anymore. I'm not going to sit there and tell you how to do your podcast because it just doesn't make sense for us, right? I've got to focus on what's the highest value use of my time that can help the most people. If you do want me to work on your podcast with you, that's a paid coaching thing. And if you can take on that paid coaching, that can then support some of the work we're doing so we can keep doing what we're doing and support our next generation of Asian entrepreneurs. And just really supporting the general startup ecosystem in the UK, because I'm born and raised in London. I believe in what we're doing here. I love what we're doing here. And I get to meet so many incredible people all the time. But there's more that needs to be done. Our job is just starting. And I'm excited for that challenge and that future. And sometimes I wonder why I put myself under the pressure I do. And then other times I see like the results and where people, the joy it brings people and where they've been able to transform different industries. And like, it's a pretty cool life sometimes, right? I'm very privileged to be in a position. And again, just thank you to everybody who supports us, everybody who believes in us, everybody who gives back for the mentorship programs. Thank you.